Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to share with you the top 10 most difficult Ark Tames, so let's get into it. In at number 10 we have the Desmodus, and this is just one of those creatures which, albeit isn't going to be the most difficult tame out there, getting those blood bags for that first Desmodus is definitely going to be a challenge, and also just surviving the whole thing and getting to the area where they spawn is quite a challenge as well, especially when there's so many of them all in one place and you just want to tame one of them and you don't want loads and loads of these things after you. And obviously the getting of the blood bags will be a pain, as it will take ages to extract a blood bag like every 5 seconds from your body. But it's definitely well worth the tame. The Desmodus is one of the most useful tames out there, especially for its sanguine elixir, as it is an absolute taming cheat. Next up we have the Bloodstalker, and this has the exact same taming method as the Desmodus, but why is it more difficult? Well, blood bags are not easy to get on Gen 1 in any circumstance at all, as yes, once you tamed your first Desmodus you have yourself a blood bag farm, whereas that simply isn't possible on Gen 1, and you just have to keep doing that same method and getting hundreds and hundreds of blood bags to actually get yourself a really high level Bloodstalker. And these are definitely essential on the Gen 1 map, as they are pretty much the only creature which you can use to get around, as flyers are banned on that map. And they're a pretty good shout on Operation 2, as flyers also aren't allowed on that map, although you do have creatures like the Rock Drake, whereas on Gen 1 this is your only real creature which you can use to travel around at great speed, like the Rock Drake on Operation. Now next up we have the Giga, and I was going to put the Crocodontosaurus in this spot, but I decided to just discount it on the list, as actually that tame isn't too bad and it can be somewhat friendly compared to the Giga tame, especially considering how little resource you need for that tame, and albeit sometimes it can be buggy, I would say the Giga tame is still just a little bit harder because of the amount of resource you need for this thing. And yes, you can trap this thing pretty easily and then you just have to stand there and shoot it, and it's not going to be the hardest tame in the world, but obviously it is still going to be a very difficult one, and considering its size and absolute mass as a creature, you kind of expect that. But hundreds and hundreds of trank darts does definitely take a while to get, and it is pretty difficult to get, as crafting all of those narcotics and then all of those arrows is just going to take a lot of time. And if you're breeding this creature on official, then have fun with raising a creature like this for 2 whole weeks. This is why I am never an Ark official player. Now next up we have the Golem, and this creature is essentially tamed by shooting cannons into this thing's face, or you can use rocket launchers, but it is a lot harder to do it with that method, albeit cannons' mobilities are absolutely terrible, whereas the rocket launcher you can aim pretty easily. It's just more difficult to actually get it to work with the rocket launcher for it to deal enough torpor before the creature actually dies, as the rocket launcher is more of an attacking weapon where no one, absolutely no one, is going to use the cannon to raid a base in a PvP scenario or anything like that. Rocket launchers with homing missiles will probably be used at some point, and they definitely are used to destroy metal bases, but not cannons. That is kind of more of a taming weapon which can be used to tame things like the Golem and also creatures like the Astrocetus as well. And it definitely does make the tame very difficult, as the cannons are hard to aim and very, very expensive. But it is well worth it, as these creatures are absolute beasts of scorched earth, and they can tear through any creature that spawns on that map. Now we have the Basilisk, and this is the first Operation creature on the list, and actually the next 2 creatures after this are Operation creatures again. Operation creatures are actually significantly harder to tame than one may think. And in terms of the Basilisk taming method, it seems very simple on paper. Just get some Rock Drake eggs, that's your only real option on Operation, but you can use Wyvern eggs, and you can use Magmasaur eggs if you want, and then drop them in front of it without aggroing it, and then it will eat them, and then you have yourself a tamed basilisk. But aggroing it is very easy, and obtaining those eggs, especially rock drake eggs on Arboration, is very, very difficult if you don't have a rock drake already. And even if you do have a rock drake, it still is a challenge to go all the way down into the red zone and get those eggs and bring them back up. The basilisk is definitely a hard tame, but a very fun one which you should do at some point, as long as it doesn't bug out, but you know, it's Ark. Now we have the rock drake, and you may be telling yourself, well, isn't the basilisk a harder tame as you have to get the eggs and also not de-aggro it? Well, this kind of becomes a more expensive tame, basically just requiring air conditioners to raise it once stolen, but obtaining that egg and also getting it out without a rock drake is very difficult, and you can tame the basilisk if you already have a rock drake, and it will make that tame much easier. But if you don't, then the basilisk tame may be considered a little bit harder, as there are some extra steps, but you do have to raise this creature as well on top of hatching it, so it is a very, very timely process, which is why I'm putting it higher on this list than the basilisk. But once tamed, this is a creature which is essential on Arboration, and if you are playing Arboration, then you definitely want to tame these things, as this is pretty much your only real way of traveling around the map like you would with a flyer, and it is such great achievement once you obtain one of these things, and it is so worth getting one of these things, and you definitely really should try and get yourself a rock drake as soon as you can. Albeit they are very difficult tames, it is definitely attainable to an Ark player with any moderate level of experience. And the Reaper had to be on this list. This creature is one of those tames with an immense amount of steps. Again, somewhat seeming simple on paper, requiring you to get this thing down below 1000 health, get impregnated by it, and then just raise the Reaper baby. But there are so many little things which you'll need to do in between that. Firstly, finding a Reaper, then building a trap to actually damage down that Reaper, then going up to it and getting impregnated by it, which can lead to you dying if for some reason it doesn't want to do the impregnation thing. You can tell its health is low enough when it has a red glow. Then after that, you need to get loads and loads of XP to get this Reaper to be as strong as possible. Then after it's raised, it's going to kill you so many times, and Reaper pheromone glands are going to be used to kind of put yourself in the position that the Reaper mother would be in. But once tamed, it is well worth it, as these are the beasts of Arboration. They deal so much damage, and no creature can really stand against the Reaper. They're even stronger than the Giga, really, in my opinion, in terms of force, and they're a lot smaller in terms of their size as well, and they have a hell of a lot more mobility over something like the Giga. In at number 3 is the Rhinognatha, and these creatures are very irritating and difficult to tame, as their tame method just has a wealth of steps. And on ASE at the moment, and just into the future on ASE, you will just have a hard time finding these things on the island or Lost Island in any swamp biome, as they are incredibly rare. Whereas on ASA, the spawns are somewhat fixed, and they're really not difficult to find at all. So it's significantly harder on the older version of Ark due to their spawns, but you can always just raise your dino count, do the dino wipe command, or anything that helps the spawning of dinos as long as you're on single players. The dino wipes command, if you wanted to know, is destroy wild dinos, if you didn't know that already. Don't just put destroy all dinos. I can't remember what it is. There's a command like destroy dinos. That will destroy your tamed dinos too, and you don't want to do that at all. So destroy wild dinos, and that is going to dino wipe all of the wild creatures on the map. And in terms of this thing's taming method, you'll want to kill a male Rhinognatha to get its pheromone, which is a challenge in itself because they have a lot of health and they pack a punch in terms of damage. Then get a Bronto on all of those items which are on screen if you want 100% effectiveness. The Bronto isn't strictly necessary, just use any kind of large creature, but the Bronto is definitely the advised. Then really you want a net gun for this, so net gun it. And then after that, you're going to want to damage this thing down to a really low amount of health, as low as you possibly can. You may need to hit it a couple of extra times. I'm using Awesome Spyglass mod here, but that isn't on ASA at the moment, and so isn't the net gun, so you need to trap it in that case. And you can always use the magnifying glass if you don't have any kind of mods to see this thing's health. The torpor isn't really necessary. Then you're going to want to feed that pheromone into your Bronto, or whatever creature you're using in this case. I'm not sure what creatures can be used. The Bronto is definitely advised. Then afterwards it will come out of its kind of net trap, and then it will impregnate your dino, which is where you want to feed it all of those resources. Then it will collapse over and your Rhino Ganatha baby will be born. In at number 2 is the Shadowmane, and this creature really seems like a very simple tame on paper, but in fact it isn't at all. This creature just has a wealth of things which can go wrong with it. Namely that this creature will just like to aggro onto everything, and you're going to need things like Gilly and probably a trap as well to do this fully successfully, or at least with the most amount of ease. And then getting the fish at the right size as well can just be a challenge in itself, because you know, Ark is Ark. But before we get into number 1, I just want to list a couple of quick honourable mentions which didn't make it onto the list. The Troodon has to be mentioned on this list, so does the Carcharodontosaurus, the Noglin, the Astrocetus, the Astrodelphis, the Titanosaur, all of the Titans which you'll find on Extinction, the Managama, and the Hesperornis, all having their own varying difficulties in taming methods. So let's get into that number 1 spot. And in at number 1 is the Amargasaurus, and this creature is by far the bane of so many people's lives, requiring Raasclark 24 hours to actually tame this thing, which is insane for a creature, which is unprecedented for every other Ark Tame. No creature has a taming method like this one, and if you do this taming method, in fact, you will probably not be sane by the end of it, allowing it to run around and fight with you until it is tamed. This is the absolute bane of any Ark player's existence. But we can't forget the Fenrir too. This thing is it's just too difficult. In at number 10, we have got the Maywing, and there's kind of one main reason at why I'm putting this creature on this list, and it is that it's such an insanely fast travel mount. It is just inherently very OP in nature. Like, you look at this creature, you think of this creature, you think of really speedy travel mounts, and that is just an OP feature in itself, being able to travel around the map with that speed without having to go into creative mode and all of that stuff. And that's not even an option if you're playing on a server. That's only really an option on just a general single player server, and you probably wouldn't do it anyway because it kind of ruins the fun of the game. But still, just I was needing something to compare it to, and although obviously it's not going to go as fast as someone flying around in creative mode, it is going to fly faster than someone in a tech suit, and it's a lot easier to get than a tech suit because you only need to be level 19 to get the saddle for this thing, and then boom, like one of the easiest tames in the game. Just trap it before you actually start knocking it out. That kind of goes for most flyers though, or even pretty much every Ark creature that's a knockout tame. It's just so much easier if you do. So yeah, that's the kind of method to the madness. And then you've got yourself a really great, really quick, speedy travel mount that's also a possible feeding trough, and it can gather berries as well. So just a nice little feature for this thing to have. Next up, we got the Thyla, and this thing kind of works for both PvE and PvP players alike out there. This creature really does pack a huge punch in damage department. It also deals the bleed ability, and it can scale any kind of wall or vertical surface, making it a prime creature for raiding people's bases on a PvP server or just in any given PvP scenario. They're also pretty decent on SOTF as well due to their high mobility, and they're not too difficult to tame on SOTF either, or really just not too difficult to tame in general. The only real difficulty is the biome they spawn in, as the redwoods can not be the friendliest of biomes pretty much all the time unless you're extremely lucky, so you always do have to be careful for these things, and like microraptors and all of that. And there are loads of things that want to kill you in the redwoods, but you know, at least Thylas do spawn there, and you can get a lot of great use out of these creatures. So I really do recommend taming one, and I really do think they are extremely OP. The only thing that could make them even more OP is if they were actually allowed into bosses, because when these things came out, they were seen as too overpowered, so then they didn't get the ability to go into bosses. But now with some newer creatures, it's kind of a little bit outdated in the sense it's actually why the Giga is not on this list. It would have been. This was maybe like 2020, 2019, 2018, but that creature is significantly more outdated nowadays than the Thyla, so, you know, that's why that creature is not on the list, if you were ever wondering at any point. But you can see actually this bleed ability in just a second here. I used to not really know what it did. I just thought it was cool, but it deals damage on a percent base scale instead of just a general damage dealing scale, so no matter the health of a creature, it will always deal the same percent amount of damage, which is why the bleed ability is so OP. And really, if you do have the time, tame yourself a Thyla. You are definitely not going to regret getting one of these things. They are totally worth it, and considering they spawn on the island, they're extremely accessible to like every single Ark player out there without fail whatsoever. Next up, we have got the Theory, and the reason why it's on this list is not just because its saddle was unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
But purely that this creature is an insane gatherer of so many kinds of resources, including fiber, which is actually one which is considerably harder to get than most other resources in bulk with a creature like this, as most herbivores will just gather berries, whereas this thing can gather berries and fiber, and it's also a pretty OP boss creature as well. It really does deal a lot of damage and pack a punch. You could probably tell it would deal a lot of damage in that kind of general area, because look at how large these things' claws are, and when you look at it, it's, I kind of call it the Freddy Krueger of Ark, if you will, or the Tickle Chicken, just depending on what context you really want. Those claws really do, again, pack a huge amount of damage into this creature. Really useful for the dragon boss fight on the island if you've never done that before, and the fiber gathering really does put them up another level for me, as yes, the moss chops is another great fiber gatherer. It really doesn't do all too much apart from that. I'm pretty sure it's really great at gathering organic polymer as well, but this is a much more OP creature and significantly more useful just to the general Ark player out there, and especially with that saddle level being so perfect, you really can't miss an opportunity on taming one of these things. They're also really great at gathering thatch and wood too, so there's nothing not to love about this creature, so I really do recommend you taming one of these things as soon as you can, really. Next up, in at number 7, we have got the RG, and doesn't this creature really deserve to be on the spot for being just such a great PvE creature? And also, I'm pretty sure it's a really great PvP creature as well, although I don't really can think of too many uses off the top of my head for this creature in terms of PvP use, but you know, there are definitely still going to pretty much be all the same uses as for PvE players, as this is a really great traveling mount and it has a heck of a lot of weight, so getting metal from point A to point B, or even maybe to point C if you're feeling like it, will be really easy. And you can also pick up a wealth of creatures with this creature, which definitely does aid this thing in being a really great successful creature, because maybe sometimes with a flyer you do want to actually pick up some creatures like Desmodus do not have that ability, although that creature is on the list for several other reasons which I think do put it higher on the list than this creature. It also does have a portable smithy as a saddle, so if you ever break a metal tool if you're out farming, well, the RG can just simply help you with that, as long as you have some metal ingots that have been smelted. Of course, you can't just use the normal raw metal, if you didn't know that already. I'm sure pretty much all of you did. There's not really a point to me saying that, but you know, just might as well, because I'm sure someone's done it before. Then you can easily repair all your metal gear, and they also do regen as well. If you quickly kill something and then eat that dead body, then you get a really nice quick regen buff, which is actually, it's pretty useful, and it's a lot more useful, and you'll use it a lot more than maybe you'd expect. Next up, we got the Carcharodontosaurus, and doesn't this creature just objectively have to be really OP? It's a hugely massive carnivore capable of dealing a lot of damage, and I also was going to consider putting the Titanosaur and things like the mech on the list as well. Actually, I might put the mech kind of here at this spot, because I kind of think it deserves to be here as well. Really huge damage dealing thing, but the Titanosaur is hugely outdated nowadays, and obviously you could kind of just chuck all the Titans here as well, although I really tend to avoid those more, as they're not permanent creatures, although they still definitely do count as creatures. You can make them permanent, of course, with things like mods and all of that for the Titans, but, you know, I tend to stray away from those things. And the Crocodile is one of those more powerful creatures you can get. That's not the only reason why a creature can be absolutely OP, but if you go by sheer strength, then this probably is the most powerful creature on the list, you could say. Maybe some other creatures could be contested against it and to it, and you know, probably just have to get Cantex to do a video on that, and then there you go, you would get the answers. But I'm probably going to say this is the most powerful one. It's somewhat more difficult to tame than the Giga because there are a few more steps. I have a guide on my channel, I'll put it up here if I actually remember to do it, otherwise you can just search that. It's not actually too difficult, you just have to be aware for some things, because it can go quite horribly wrong if you don't do it right, and you're just going to be wasting a lot of time, which, you know, you probably don't want to do. But once you do have one of these things, you really are going to enjoy it. In at number 5, we have got the Shadowmane, and this creature is here because it is just so jam-packed full of abilities. You really can't deny this creature's absolutely hugely immense strength when it comes to pretty much anything in the Ark space. It is basically uncontested in size and mobility and all of that. There is kind of one other creature which is in the number 3 spot actually, which personally I think it's really OP, but that's for a slightly different reason. But when it comes to maybe pure mobility, this does have a lot more. Like, just look at how high this thing can jump. It also does have the hydration buff, which does play a huge part in having a really OP creature. If you have buffs, the Megatherium is another great shout as well, although not on this list. It definitely wouldn't be more OP than some of these other creatures. I think that creature is actually, yes, still while OP, maybe not one of the most OP, although you could easily put it on this list and have people agreeing with you. You actually may want this thing to be on the list, so I guess I give it a quick mention here. The Shadowmane is just so packed full of abilities though. It's got the hydration buff, it's got pack buffs, it's got all of it. It can charge up damage over time, and it even has natural armor. It really is a great OP creature. Next up, we have got the Reaper, and this thing kind of just had to be here, didn't it? When you think of it, it is just such a big, bulky, huge creature, capable of so much damage. Is actually kind of a little bit absurd when you think of it, and it also really does fit into its map very well, but that's not what we're talking about today in this video. We're just talking about a creature that purely deals a lot of damage and also just has great mobility and is generally a really well-rounded creature which is capable of a lot of things. If this was able to go into bosses, then it would be even more OP. It can't though, which is kind of why the creature next up on the list, although maybe not as strong, has a lot of edge over this creature, although you can use it on Extinction for the Titans, although the Giga and the Crocodile are the more preferable options. But with loads of new creatures coming out in mods in ASA, I know Extinction is still not here yet, but there may be some other options which people may be kind of becoming more fond to. But either way, just in general terms, the Reaper is a really OP creature. Taming one on Arboration feels like an absolute slog, but a slog that I'm worth going through, and on Gen 2 it's ridiculously easy. So if you don't feel like spending an age going through a huge slog, then tame one on Gen 2 and they're really easy. But once you do have one, you really do feel on top of the world, especially if you do it on Arboration as a process. It's just significantly harder to get it done as on Gen 2. The actual process of taming is obviously the same. And in at number 3, we have got the Deinonychus, and this creature literally does bleeder damage to bosses, which is kind of the main reason why it's here, as that is an ability which no other Ark creature has, and it really does make this thing a hugely more OP creature. The fact that it can deal percentage based damage instead of just raw based damage to boss creatures, it's an insane thing to have, and it can grip onto them and all of that, and it's just an insane ability to have. Really, it feels like an absolute cheat if you go into bosses with the Deinonychus, because obviously you're also going to go with the pack as well. You're going to have pack buffs on top of it. There's just going to be buffs everywhere, and you're going to melt through those bosses so quickly. Obviously, don't do the Titans on Extinction with the Deinonychus, but for everything else, these things work really well, and maybe not the Moda actually, because they're not particularly very good underwater creatures, although they still can do a little bit. Just, you know, maybe that's not particularly what they were designed for, so probably don't bring them to the Moda fight. They'll probably drown anyway, so really, I wouldn't try that whatsoever. I don't really know why I'm trying to like convince you to not use these things for the Moda. I'm pretty sure you weren't going to anyway, but you know, I guess that segment happened. Also, these things take no fall damage, which is a nice thing, so you don't have to dismount just before you hit the ground, no matter, like, no, when you fall from a higher place. Sorry, I don't know what sentence was trying to come out there, but that's never going to happen again. Either way, these things, great mobility, and although maybe their parkouring skills isn't quite as elegant as the Thyla solution, I still really like it, and it works, and once you get the hang of it, it really does act quite well. And at number 2, we've got the Desmodus, and this creature just kind of has to be here because it can go, no, we don't want to talk about that, it can go invisible in the night. It's not why it can go OP. My brain is in a muddle. The reason why is because Sanguine Elixir exists, it's a blood bag farm, and you can also pick players off riders with this thing, which is absolutely OP for given PvP scenarios. That's why it's not because it can go invisible in the night time. I can't even show you that because I recorded all this B-roll on the Wasteland biome, and then I realised that you can't set it to night. I probably should have gone to the Snow Dome or the Desert Dome, but I didn't. So, you know, but at least you know it exists. These things can also just grab onto walls, like the Tapijara, which is a nice thing. Just don't press E or the dismount button when you're like this. Someone's done it before. Press space or whatever the equivalent button is on console. Not really sure, but, you know, these things, really OP creatures. Sanguine Elixir, absolute cheap for tames. A third of it done like that with a click of a button. And obviously the fact that you can pick people off riders with this thing, insane. Really great for PvP scenarios, and it's also really quick as well. And in at number 1, we have the Rhinognatha, and the reason why I say this is the most OP Ark creature is it really does feel out of place for just what it can do. The fact that this thing can pick up Rexes and Paraceratherians and all of that just kind of seems a bit out of this world to me, and although they're really useful in ASA at the moment because cryopods don't exist, still they feel really out of place in the general Ark game to me, and kind of maybe too far out of a league that they really shouldn't be going into. And personally, from my opinion, I would like to nerf the Rhinognatha because I find it way too OP. Personally, also on ASA, I think it should be a little bit rarer, not quite as rare as it is on just general normal ASE, as you can barely even find those things, but still, on ASA, I feel like there is a little bit of an overspawn there. And you may completely disagree with me on this, and you're happy to, and you can comment down below your thoughts, as I'm always happy to hear your thoughts on creatures like this. But personally, I come from a much earlier stage of Ark playing, from like 2015, 2016, 2017, etc, etc. Going onwards, I did start playing in 2015, so I've been playing Ark for absolutely ages now, and I kind of really like those primitive feelings of the game. Obviously the game has to evolve, and generally it will kind of just get easier, and there'll be some new cooler more OP creatures being added as the game progresses, but I feel like this is a huge step too far, and I don't really know what the Fasilasuchus, I think it is, will be like on Scorched. Maybe that will be even more OP than this thing, and I don't really like the way that this is all going, but it does seem to be quite popular with the general Ark player base, so I guess it's a working marketing solution for wildcards and snail games and those kind of people. But also with the like expansion pack, like extra creatures as well, that's like even more OP. I really don't like the route that it's going with these kind of creatures. Again, you're very happy to disagree with me, but personally I think the Rhinognatha is too OP. And currently I think it's kind of the most OP Ark Tame out there, just no questions asked. Personally, really not a favourite of mine, but you know, that's my opinion on it, and I still do think it is a great creature. I'm not dissing it for any of that, just personally, like, way too OP. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you enjoyed this one. As always, comment down below what do you think of my Rhinognatha query. Do you agree with that or not? Comment down below what's the most OP Ark creature to you, and if you didn't agree with this list, your 10 down below, and I'll see you all later.